get-together session brought to you by getAbstract. I'm Kirsten Müller-Daubermann, and I am your host for today's session. We're so glad that you're joining us from wherever you may be in the world this Monday. We started these get-togethers a few weeks ago as a live book reading club. We, every single day, get on here on Facebook, on Vimeo, and bring in authors, guests, and other collaborators and team members at getAbstract to talk about books, abstracts we are reading, and things that are helping us get through this pandemic stronger, putting the latest, greatest information into context for you that will help you both personally and professionally. That's our aim. Before we dive into our conversation with Erica here today, I do also want to let you know that in solidarity with all of you, as well as to keep these resources flowing at a time when we all need them most, we have made the getAbstract library free until May 18th. So we just encourage you to take advantage of that. Of course, our website is getAbstract.com. You can go there, check out any book or abstract that you fancy. And you can also sign up for our daily newsletter, the journal, so that you can get all these resources in context of the current pandemic. So that's what we're all about. So today we are going to be discussing something extremely relevant for all of us, especially over the last couple of months, and that is effectively working from home, effective remote working. And we're discussing that with the senior managing editor at getAbstract, Erica Rauzin. Erica, welcome.
Hello, good to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So first of all, where are you joining us from today, and how are you doing in lockdown in your corner of the world?
We're doing fine. We're in Miami Beach. It's a beautiful day. We're sort of used to this by now, like everybody else. So we're doing okay.
Wonderful. So Erica, working remotely has become suddenly a very new reality for people, and they're having to adjust, and it has caused a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, and probably there are a lot of people out there who are very much enjoying it. But this is not a new situation for you. You've actually been working remotely for 20 years. So I'd love for you to tell us how you got into working remotely at the beginning, and what are some of the pros and cons you've experienced?
I've been doing it so long that I'm having to sort of think back to what it was like when I started. And when I started, I had little kids, and there was a way of trying to work around their hours. But over time, particularly as I became a full-time staffer at getAbstract, it's really become what my routine is. I'm very comfortable with it, and I enjoy it. You have to um, create your own setting for productivity, but that's worked out, I think.
What have been some of the biggest pros? What do you love the most about working from home, and what do you find challenging?
I think the challenges are the distractions of home, the refrigerator, the television, my family, the dog. These things are
Yeah.
distractions, but what we're seeing in the books and podcasts and articles that we check is to let home be home. You have to create a circumstance that works for you while being aware of your surroundings and where you are, so that you're approaching it in a realistic way. And I think that's
Yeah,
worked
absolutely.
out. And you like the independence, but you have to understand the accountability. So that's the balance.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And that's what we're going to be talking about. You suggested several different abstracts on this topic. Obviously, there's tons in the getAbstract library about how to work remotely or work from home in a way that is effective and productive. One of those is actually a podcast from 21st Century Work Life that talks about working together anywhere, how to do that well. So for this new reality that so many are facing, they've had to make a really fast transition. Whereas, some people have been working from home for a long time, like yourself. What are some tools that you can give people who may be watching this for success that they can implement immediately to make this working remotely thing work?
Well, you start with your own circumstances and how you work with that. You still try to create a schedule where you set your goals in the morning and you set goals for the week. You still have deadlines from whatever company you work for, those deadlines can become, excuse me, your deadlines can become milestones for you so that you have something that you're aiming for. That makes a big difference as you're working. You want to be sure that your technology is working for you. And that's something where your company or your employer, if you're doing it as gig work, should support you in being sure that your technology is aligned. You don't want to have to fight with your equipment every time you sit down to do something. You want to get that set up from the beginning so that it works for you. Um, you want to really get to know your company and your context, even if you're far away. I follow getAbstract on Teams, not just what my editorial team is doing, but what the other teams are doing, text for my work and have an alignment with the company. Um, you have to handle, as you would working in an office, your email feed. One of the things this podcast suggests is putting your non work email into a separate folder and dealing with it during time that isn't work time, that you try and put that time in its own boundaries, even if your hours are odd, even if you work when your kids sleep. Those hours should belong to your work time so that you have clarity. Um, the other thing that they point out is to make the most of your collaborative time with your team, with your boss. Um, know what you want to cover, be in that moment with them. And then when you're home, be home. You want to um, avoid some of the pitfalls of remote work. Oddly enough, because I know companies worry about productivity, one of the biggest pitfalls of remote work is that people work all the time. It never stops being
Yep.
the office. And you have to avoid burnout for yourself. Eat well, sleep well, exercise. Um, be sure that you and your family are sane and secure. Don't let being a remote worker govern your whole life. Let it govern your work life. And that's hard to do even if you do go to an office, but at home, you have to be conscious of it.
Yeah, that's so good. And so many simple things, but if you change them, it works. It really does. Okay, so let's transition to longer term solutions because I think a lot of people are hoping that their employers are going to see that their workers can continue to be productive, that there are a lot of good things about having more team members who have the option to work remotely, maybe a couple days a week, if not every day. But the situation is going to have to be fluid moving forward. So if someone is looking at a situation where they say, hey, okay, I realize now working remotely is going to become more of my normal, what long-term solutions can they be starting to think about implementing now so that they can manage this for the long term, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint.
It is a marathon. And although some of us had to come home abruptly to work at home, I think going back into the office will be step by step. And when we start talking about the company's point of view a little later, we're looking at a hybrid work situation. Remote work is going to become more normal. And many people have hybrid schedules. From the point of view of the remote worker, you have your own personal logistics to consider. As you go back to work, you go back to all the things you dealt with before: commuting, childcare, um, back to some of those logistics. You also will have to um, look at where you stand with your company. If you see that you're falling out of sync with your team, if you feel like you're not in concordance with your boss, while you're home is still the time to have those conversations. You don't want to delay keeping things as fluid as you can with your employer. Um, I think it's also important to be aware that Corona is not going to go away because we go back to work. That some of the precautions of social distancing are going to apply even back in the office. And each company will set its own policy, but each of us is also going to be responsible for our own well being. So I think that'll be part of the transition.
Yeah, that's so many good things to think about. Thank you, Erica. And I would love to invite all of you that are watching, if you have a strategy that's worked really well for you and your family that you've discovered during this time and you want to share it, please go ahead and put that in the comments. Obviously, this is a collaborative thing that we're all going through, something that everyone probably has a little bit of expertise in by now and how to manage their work from home. So if you've got any comments or expertise or advice, please feel free to leave those in the comments. Of course, any questions for Erica as well, you can put those there too. I'll be keeping an eye out for your questions so that we can throw them over to Erica. So let's transition to managing remote teams. Again, maybe some people have been doing this for a while, and maybe this is a whole new world for some managers out there. And managing a team just generally with people you see face-to-face on an everyday basis can be a challenge. What are some of the common pitfalls for those managing remote teams, and how can they avoid falling into them?
I think you start with, if you're not already a good leader, it's hard to be a good remote leader. That you still need all those skills you need to be a good leader anyway, and in person, being tuned into your people, being a mensch, knowing what's going on in your company, knowing what's going on with your folks, having clear goals. All those things apply no matter where your workforce is. This particular podcast that we're talking about, who's responsible for connection in remote teams, puts that responsibility pretty squarely on the shoulders of the leader. That sense of connection comes from leadership. And I have two things I want to be sure I mention. One is that we do worry about accountability and productivity, and leaders of remote teams need accountability from their people, but that accountability should be based on results, not on processes. You can't govern the process anyway. You have to know what you can and can't control as a leader. And if you can set clear goals and results and the worker can live up to them, I think at some point you have to relinquish some control over the process. That there's just no way to stay on top of both ends of it. And that if they are bringing you the results you want, if you're giving them clear expectations and they're meeting it, that's where your evaluation base is. And sometimes those goals are quantifiable and measurable. How many pieces did I help activate this week? And sometimes they're more intangible. Am I keeping writers? Am I losing writers? How is that working out overall? The other thing that I had an experience with a week or so ago is something went wrong with a particular piece, and I was ready to sort of spring to my writer's defense and call the company and have a little fit. And my writer, who's also a friend, said to me, "This is not the time. This is the time to be gentle. Everybody's stressed. Everybody's work is a little disjointed. Things will work out. This is a time to bring calmness and steadiness and gentleness to what you're doing." And that was really good, helpful advice to me. And it helped me keep that sense of perspective that you need as a worker and as a leader.
I love that. What were those 3 words that you used? You said gentleness. Repeat those again. You said that
this is a time to be gentle and to have a sense of perspective, to know what's urgent and what's not urgent, to know what you can control and what you can't control. The other thing from the leader's perspective is, as with all leadership tasks, the leader has to have a macro view and a micro view. Your macro view is, are you hitting your organizational targets? Are you within your budget? Are you keeping your overall calendar for the year? Do you have the employee mix you need? Are you hiring appropriately? Are you overall doing your job? But the other part is very micro. Are your people okay? With respect for their privacy, still, are you saying to them when you talk to them, not just how's your project going, but how's your life going? Are you offering the support they need? Are you giving yourself the support you need? The leader has to model that you can't do this 24/7. I don't expect to call my boss at midnight. I do, though, appreciate that we touch base once a week and we have a conversation every week. And if your team is really big, you can't do that. But it's a big help to me that we do that. And that conversation is also a signal to me that he cares how I'm doing, that we're caught up on work, and that I have the opportunity, if I need to raise a flag about something. And that effort to keep in touch is particularly important now.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question from Facebook that I'd love to pose to you. So Gretchen asks, you mentioned bringing calmness to what you're doing as a worker and a leader. Are there any summaries that you can recommend for staying calm and collected?
Oh, Connie Gebesdorf did a whole interview with you about stress. They mentioned several of those pieces that are really excellent. I can't say that one of them comes to mind at the moment, but if you look at his interview, he went through several that were really good. I like very much the checklist manifesto. It's not a mindfulness abstract, but it's a how to keep everything calm and under control abstract. And when I feel like things are flying off, I go back to that. And it talks about just how to organize your thought process, which does keep you calm. I also think it helps create that connection and that calmness if you know there's a moment during the week when everybody on the team is available at the same time. So you can have those discussions. And what we do at getAbstract is we all are physically together once a year. And it's a big effort for the company, but it also makes a difference in keeping that perspective and knowing who people are in maintaining relationships.
Yeah, excellent. So I think that we'll probably be able to find that abstract and put it in the comments so that people can find it, the checklist manifesto. So great recommendation. I'd love to hear from you with all this experience in your background. What has worked well for you as a manager, and what have you appreciated most from people who have been your managers, perhaps, in a working remotely situation?
I think a lot of the answer in all those directions hinges on trust. You have to know that you're not going to get blindsided, that you're not going to get surprised, that the lines of communication are clear, that processes are aligned so that you can sit back and relax. I have managed for some time our crew of US based freelance editors and writers. And it's different managing freelancers because we're mostly in touch by email. Our connection is mostly project based, but we try to give people choices within achieving our goals. So our writers know we want clear, smart, accurate summaries. I get a better summary if the writer has a choice of which books to work on. So I might offer 4 or 5 books and let the writer come back to me. And so then they're reading a book they're going to be engaged with. And I might say, what's a good time frame for you? 2 weeks, 3 weeks? And we'll set a deadline together. Now the writer knows at that point that he or she is accountable for that deadline. But we've set it up in a way where each individual in the transaction has autonomy as much as works for the overall. And I think that adds a lot to trust. And I think staying in touch overall makes a big difference. And you develop a track record with people. And that's also, I think, you develop a track record with a company. So you have several layers where that trust building is really, I think, the linchpin.
Yeah, totally. And we've talked a lot about leadership today. On Friday in our get-together session with Alan Schweier, we talked about HR departments and leadership again, and it just becomes so clear that even though we might talk about topics around this, so much comes back to leadership. And that actually leads me to my last question about the leadership of the company. So we've talked about the role of the employee, the manager. As people start to slowly transition forward into a new normal, because we're not necessarily transitioning back to the workplace that we knew before, where remote working is more of a norm, what role do companies play in moving people together, building trust, and how organizations will adjust?
I think that fortunately our reentry will be step by step. I don't think it will be abrupt. I think companies are going to have a chance to look at very specific things like how do we arrange our physical space now in this new normal? which workers want to come back into the office full time? Are we looking at a future where remote is part of normal? So there's a hybrid. Some of our sources have suggested that each person is going to have an ideal mix 2 days in the office a week, 3 days in the office. And there's going to be places where companies are going to find the need for new flexibility. I also think that companies are going to find they get more productivity. They might save money on things like office space. Um, that they're going to have to offer remote work as an option to compete for talent. Now, that's not as big
Mm.
an issue in today's job market, which is very rocky, but in the job market we had 6 months ago, and then we may have sometime in the future again, there's still going to be that competition for very talented people. And this is a win win perk for a company to give people the option to work remotely. I also think that this takes back to the thing that we see from our CEOs that I think is really so pivotal. Even your most far flung remote worker has to know what your mission is and what your values are. Not what you say your values are, but how you live your values. And that's where you have a sense of steadiness as a worker, even if you don't see people for a long time, even if you're a voice on the phone once a week. If you understand that we curate and summarize useful knowledge so business people can make better decisions, you have a mission. If you understand that we work ethically and we treat each other with respect, you have a sense of values. And that gives you a foundation for what you're doing, no matter where you are.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. We have another question from Facebook, and Dieter asks, Erica, there are companies that currently have a lot more to do than usual. Those companies are lucky, but at the same time, it's the economic situation in many countries is a challenging one. So even though they may have more to do, it might be more challenging work. Anyway, those employees they have work piling up with their families at home as well. You can define lists and working times as much as you want. It may not be enough. If you can't do justice to anyone, how can you at least do justice to yourself? It's a great question.
I think part of that is knowing what really has to be done now and what can wait. Understanding what's urgent and what isn't urgent, I think is going to be very crucial. And there's some days when you just can't do it. And that may mean that today the day goes to the kids and you carve out some time after they're asleep. Or you carve out a quiet afternoon or a time when your spouse can take the kids. You can't do everything every minute. And I think that's just reality. You are in a tough situation, and companies are also. Many companies have had very reluctantly to cut people's hours, to cut people's salaries, to lay people off. Phasing those people back in is going to be really a new activity. Generally, when you go through that kind of a transition, it's very hard to do it in a way that you show people out the door and don't burn any bridges. So you're really looking for how you reconstitute your workforce if you've been in that situation, and how you may reallocate a different amount of funding to get to your core purpose. I think we're going to see that things are going to happen in waves, not just virus concerns in waves, but also gradually rebuilding back into a new normal. And we're going to have to be not so demanding on ourselves that we create a standard of perfection. I think one of the books we said even said you have to know when good is good and when perfect is
Yes,
not good.
yes, or not necessary,
Or not
or not
necessary.
possible.
Or not
Great.
possible.
Great words of wisdom, Erica. Thank you so much. We have another question from John on Facebook. It says, he asks, we've achieved more in the last month with the acceptance of remote work than we have in years. Do you think this will have a social impact on us if more people are working from home and interacting face to face less?
I think it will inevitably have a social impact, and that maintaining that sense of collegiality is the reason you might try and do Zoom meetings instead of phone meetings so you see each other, where you might try to have those conversations with your teammates. I know I speak every week with my boss, but I also have occasional phone calls with my colleagues and my teammates. And I think that helps tremendously, that you keep the connections you can keep. Um, but social life for work is going to be different, like a lot of other things will be different, and it will rebuild. I also see, though, that we're more cooperative and less competitive, that we really have that overall sense of where we're trying to go together, and that's very helpful. Companies are going to need to be careful with remote workers that they stay attuned to that worker's professional development and career path, that out of sight is never out of mind.
Yeah, so great. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the great questions online. So Erica, I just have one last question to ask you. You've been doing this a long time, and I think usually very successful people have a very critical eye. It's one of the reasons why they're very successful. So they can see where problems are, what they need to fix, what needs to be solved. And working from home, especially if it's a brand new thing, it can be easy to see all the challenges and all the things that are frustrating and new and different and make it difficult to adjust and continue to be productive and keep your professional work at a high standard. You mentioned about shifting the perspective to gentleness, kindness, and gratitude. And so I wanted to ask you, what is the thing as a remote worker that you have been the most grateful about over the past 20 years in your situation?
There are a few things. I would say the two biggest are the caliber of the company and its leadership. I don't always agree with everything the company does, but I always trust its intentions. And that's made a huge difference. I also think that having the support of my family has been tremendous. Um, from the perspective of working at home, it's very hard to be a good wife, mother, grandmother, and at the same time be a very good worker and productive if the human alignments in both those places aren't working. Because we try to work very practically, but it's like we know now about consumers and about economics. Many things are emotional and behavioral, and that has to be in place. And that's worth your attention. If you need that mental health day, if you need that mental health support, if you need to call someone up and say, were we sort of jangling with each other when we spoke? What do we need to talk about? I think that helps a lot in keeping a smooth path. And in terms of pitfalls,
Wonderful.
I also think we have to see that different functions run on different tracks. Everything we want to do in our company, in sales, in IT, in editorial, in administration, we're all trying to get to the same place, but we're not all going to get there at the same time. And I think we have to have that understanding about each other's work, that everybody's doing their best to get it all done.
Yes, that's such a wonderful way to finish. Everyone's doing their very best to get it all done. Erica, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time and for sharing your wisdom.
My pleasure, Kirsten. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to thank all of you so much for joining us. Of course, the links to those abstracts that Erica talked about today will be in the comment section. And we encourage you to read them and use them as resources for you, whatever situation you find yourself in professionally at the moment. Also, before we sign off, I want to encourage you again to go to getAbstract.com and take advantage of the free library until May 18th, and to also sign up for our daily newsletter so you can get the latest information about the pandemic in context. And of course, please go ahead and share this resource. It will be on our Facebook page as well as on our Vimeo page. So if you heard something today that was really meaningful that you would like to share with a colleague, family member, or a friend who could also really use this advice, then please go ahead and feel free to share that with them. We'll be back here for more live get-together sessions this week, so you can follow us on social to check out the schedule, time, topics, and guests for all of those. Wherever you are in the world today, we wish you a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Extraordinary challenges require extraordinary responses from thought leaders, company executives, and employees. As the coronavirus pandemic unfolds and businesses scramble to adapt to escalating containment efforts, getAbstract is here to help organizations navigate this crisis wisely and professionally. For over 20 years, we've been committed to providing relevant knowledge from reliable sources to help people make better decisions in their personal and professional lives. In line with our mission to empower decision makers with relevant knowledge from trusted sources, we are proud to offer businesses free access to our full library until May 18. Embark on a no-strings-attached knowledge journey with getAbstract. Sign up today.